Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to return to the series that I was doing on converting the board game Source of the Nile into a Twine game. I haven't done anything on that series for several videos because I've been doing something else, but I would like to return to it at least for this one and hopefully for some more in the future. So, as you can see, we've started an expedition. We have a doctor and a missionary coming with us. We have some guards, bearers, some muskets and some gifts. And we've met a group of warriors and we approach them in a friendly manner. All of that is things that we have talked about already, but something new has happened. The locals have taken us to their settlement, and now we have a question: how many gifts will you offer? And we have a drop-down menu here. We can offer 0 gifts, or we can go all the way up to 40, because that's how many we have with us. But I'm only going to offer a small number. I'm going to offer 4. And when we press continue, we should see that this number of gifts goes down. It should go down to 36, which indeed it does. And we also see that the locals accept our gifts and welcome us. And we see something that we've seen before. We saw this when we were taken prisoner. Because we have a missionary and a doctor, they try and interact with the locals. The missionary attempts to convert the locals and they applaud, and the doctor attempts to treat the locals, but they contract a strange disease and die. So we now have the possibility of sort of friendly interactions with the locals. So that's what the game does. Let's have a look at the code that allows that to happen. So get into Twine. So there are there aren't any new variables in this. There are quite a few new pages that we're going to be looking at. And it's down, as you might expect, it's down in the section dealing with interacting with locals, which, as I've said in the last one in this series, the way I set it up is the main loop of the player's turn. So moving, getting lost, seeing if you meet any locals, seeing how much movement points you've got left. When you run out, you hunt. Then you check for starvation and sickness and for what you discover. And then after that, it sort of loops round, or when I program it, it will loop around to start another turn, assuming that the expedition is still going and the explorer is still alive. And I've set it up with that horizontal line is the main loop, and then dealing with locals is sort of off to one side, because it's a quite detailed thing that can happen, but it only happens some of the time. Most of the time, when you check to see if there are any locals, there won't be any, and you won't have to deal with them. So the new stuff starts when we get a neutral reaction. The locals tend to get friendlier as you go further inland, and the explanation for that given in the game rules is that the locals nearer the coast have had experience of raiding for slaves, and so they've become very hostile. And so when you meet a group of warriors, generally you'll find that they're going to attack you, even if they're greatly outnumbered, and it's not a very good idea from their perspective. But sometimes you will get a neutral result. Not necessarily a friendly result, because you can still get into a fight depending on the policy that you've selected and the decisions that you make. But it partly depends on the policy that you've selected, which is $PO. And you probably remember, if you've been following the series, that you have five options, and they're listed on this screen. You can cease travelling, take up defensive positions. You can attempt to retrace your steps and find another route inland, or at least you can do that if you're heading inland. If you're heading back to the coast, the assumption that I made is that you would be sort of sticking to the route that you know, and therefore you'd be sort of unwilling to diverge in case you got lost and ended up sort of miles down the coast and didn't know how to find your way back to port. So if you're going inland, you can retrace your steps, because it doesn't matter when you go inland. It doesn't really matter so much to you which way you go. You might say, well, our object is to follow this river and find its headwaters, but if that proves impossible, well, you can still try and sort of explore something else. Whereas when you're heading back, you're definitely heading for that one port. There aren't the assumption is that there's sort of one friendly port and the rest is basically unknown to you. So that's why you only have that option when you're heading inland. Policy 3, continue on your way as if the locals were not there. Policy 3 is seek contact with the locals with great caution and a great show of force. Policy 4, continue on your way as if the locals were not there. Policy 5, approach the locals in an open and friendly manner. So there's only 2 of those options where you're actually trying to interact with the locals. Seek contact with the locals with great caution and a great show of force, and approach the locals in an open and friendly manner. And the other ones are more defensive. We'll keep going and just sort of ignore them and hope they leave us alone. We'll turn around and retrace our steps, or we'll stop travelling, take up camp, and sort of stay on guard. So what happens if you get a neutral reaction depends very much on the policy that you have chosen, and that is detailed in the neutral page. If PO is 1, you make camp for the day. Instead of hunting, you stay on guard against attack. So Z is set equal to 0 because Z is used. I mean, Z is used for a lot of things. It's a temporary variable, but when you go hunting, Z is the number of rations that you gained by hunting. So what this is going to do is send you to the square starvation, because the order of the normal turn is, do I have any movement points left? Well, if so, let's go back and keep moving. If not, well, that's the end of the day, and the next thing to do is hunting. And then whether the hunting succeeds or not, then we check for starvation. What's happening if you go on guard is that you can't hunt because you're sort of standing on guard. Everyone's standing on guard, waiting to be attacked. So Z is set to 0, meaning that you got no rations today, and it goes on to starvation. So if you're low on rations, option 1 is probably not a great option. If you have rations saved up, then option 1 might be good because it's the sort of safest one. It's the least likely to get you ambushed. If you chose option 2, then we go to the page retrace, which I haven't coded yet, but that's going to involve you go back a few miles and try to find another route inland, because you can only do that option when you're going inland. If you choose option 4, then it's quite simple. If you have a neutral reaction, it means they ignore you. Option 4 is continue on your way as if they're not there, and they respond in kind, and you go to check MP, which is simply seeing whether you have any more movement points. In other words, your turn just continues as if you hadn't met them. So it's only if you chose option 3 or option 5, which are the 2 ways of approaching the locals, that you get taken to their settlement, which is on the page gifts. All right, so let's have a look at gifts. This is very small. I probably could have sort of had these. I could have turned these into fewer than 4 pages, but I thought it was easier to see what's happening if I split it up as much as possible. So that's why they're all quite short pages. Okay, so the locals take you to their settlement. If EX8 is equal to 0, EX8 is the number of gifts that you have. and you're going to be asked how many gifts that you're going to offer, and if you have 0, well, obviously that's an automatic fail. It's automatically the case that they're going to be hostile to you. They'll be insulted by your lack of gifts. And so we go to the page which I haven't coded yet, which is if your gift is insufficient. Obviously, a gift of 0 is always going to be insufficient. Always going to be insufficient. And so we go to Hostile Village, which is the page that will deal with what happens when your gifts aren't good enough. Otherwise, in other words, EX8 is not equal to 0, and it can never be negative, so that just means it's greater than 0. We go to the next screen on, which is Offer Gifts. And again, this code could have been put in this page, but I thought it was easier. I've been making smaller pages lately because I think it's easier to see what's going on. So we get the text. How many gifts will you offer? Now, the command that we're using to do this drop-down menu is called listbox. And I have dealt with it before, but I will go through it again. And it's one of those things where instead of having the code directly, we're going to write the code into a variable, and then at the end we're going to print the variable. And the reason for that is that if we do the code as we go, it doesn't work properly. And in particular, this for loop seems to make it not work properly. So what do we write into $Z? Well, the first thing is listbox Z in quotes. So that just tells it this is going to be a listbox command. Oops. That /quote means write the quote into the variable. Don't treat it as the end of the text. It's part of the text. So listbox $Z. $Z is the variable that the choice is written into. So this is saying start a drop-down menu, and the result of the drop-down menu is going to be stored in variable Z. Then we add this to Z, this option 0. Now, of course, these returns aren't part of the text Z. It would actually be a continuous line of text like that, but it's easier to conceive of if we have this, and in fact, if we have an indentation like that. So what this means, option 0, when you have just one thing like that, it means that 0 is both what is displayed as that choice and the variable that is written into Z. They don't have to be the same. We could have done something like this. And that would mean that it displayed the text offer no gifts, and if that choice was made, it would put 0 into Z. But since the display text and the number is the same, we can just do it like that. Then we have a for loop. The for loop goes from 1 to EX8, which is the number of gifts, because of course you can offer one gift, 0 gifts, or all your gifts, or any number in between. And so for each of those options, we do this. We add to Z this text, and the text will be different depending on the value of Y. So we'll add option 1, oops, excuse me, option 2, option 3, and so on, all the way up to however many gifts we have. Let's say option 40. And then we have a /listbox, which just tells the computer that, okay, this particular drop-down menu is now over. And these drop-down menus don't in themselves move the program to any new page, so we have to have a continue button. And the button is just this one here. So we have the button, we have the text that is displayed. It doesn't need to be in quotes because there's no spaces, so it's just the text continue. Then we have the page that we're going to go to when the button is clicked. That does need to be in quotes because it has a space in between it. And then if we wanted to put any code that executes when the button is pressed, that would be in here, but we don't. We could reduce ex8 by the choice, for example. We could put that in here. We could go set ex8 equals ex8 minus z, for example. We'd probably put that on a different line, but so we'd probably, if we did want to do any code, we'd probably do it like this. But we're not doing that. We're doing that. We are going to do that. We are going to reduce the gifts by the number offered, of course, but we're going to do it on the next page, on this assessed gifts page. So the player presses continue once they've chosen how many gifts to offer, and then we assess them. So Z is the number of gifts offered. We have a little note to ourselves here, and Y is the higher of 2 die rolls. So we set ex8 equals ex8 minus z, so however many gifts are offered, that they take them and you lose them. Then we set y equals random 1 to 6, and we set x equals random 1 to 6, so we simulate rolling 2 normal die. We have this message in red which says you rolled x and y, whatever they might be. These red messages are just for when we're testing the game. It's not intended that you'll see that in the final game, the player will see that. And then we have a look at, actually this is slightly inaccurate. It's not that y is the higher of 2. We are going to use the higher of 2 die rolls, but this says y is the higher of 2 die rolls, but actually it'll be x or y is the higher of 2 die rolls. So I'll fix that in the version that I have uploaded to itch.io. All right, so we look at if math.max $x, $y. Math.max just means the maximum of however many items are in this list, in this case 2. So if math.max x.y, in other words, if the higher of the 2 die rolls times the number of gifts rolled, which is z, is less than $is square bracket $i end square bracket, then we include hostile village. In other words, if the higher of 2 die rolls multiplied by the number of gifts offered is less than this, then that's not enough, and we go to hostile village. So what does that? What does this is square bracket I and square bracket mean? Well, it is a measure of how many warriors you meet in a given group. The variable $i is how far inland you are, and $is is an array which I guess stands for inland strength or something. And so $is 10, if that has a value of 8, then that means that if you're 10 miles inland, you'll meet a band of 8 warriors. That's the sort of fighting strength of the warriors there, and it gets higher the more you go inland. The explanation for that given in the original rules is again the slave trade. The communities that are that are not very far inland have been either reduced by the slave trade or they've moved away, and so there's only sort of small bands left. As you get further inland, they'll be less affected by it, and so you'll meet larger, on average, larger groups. So if the higher of 2 die rolls times the number of gifts you offered is less than the fighting strength of this particular community, then they're hostile. In other words, more warriors means you should give them more gifts on average. Then we go to hostile village, and if I won't show you hostile village because I haven't coded anything yet, but that's going to be where the decision gets made as to what form does this hostility take. Are they going to attack you, or are they going to try and poison you? Those are the options. We'll see that in a future video. Otherwise, the locals accept your gifts and welcome you. And then we go to friendly village. So I will show you friendly village because there is something to see there. Now, you probably remember that we have if you're taken prisoner, the missionaries will preach to the captors, and the doctors will try and treat their captors. And the same thing is true in a friendly village. If you have a missionary, they will try to preach, and if you have a doctor, they will try to treat. Probably after, the way I've got it set up now is that we go to preach check, which checks whether you've got a missionary, and if so, deals with preaching, and then treat check, and then you do trade. In the final game, I think it'll probably be the other way around, but for now I've got it as in you trade, and then you get the results of the preaching, and you get the results of the doctor treating them. So I guess the in-game fiction is that you, the explorer, were dealing with sort of trading, and then once you finish that, you sort of look around and go, well, where's the missionary? Oh God, he's preaching, and you see what results have happened from that. So let's have a look at this preach check. Well, it's the same thing as we had before. It's just that we moved it into a separate page of its own. And the reason we moved it into a separate page of its own is because we need to access it from more than one place. And so when you do that, when you have code that is accessed from more than one place, usually the best way to do that is to put it in its own page and then have an include command in the two places that that refers to that page, and that way you don't have to do the code twice. So when you are a prisoner, there is an option to check to see if any preaching is going to happen, and later on there's an option to see if any treating is going to happen. This is an example of these are very short pages, and really, sorry, there we go. These are very short pages, and really it would probably be better to have those two pages as the same one, but for now, it's fine, I think. And then preach check, I'll show you preach check, although we have dealt with this before. If $P6 is equal to 1 and $S6 is equal to 0 and $IP $I is not equal to 1, then we set $IP I to 1 and we include preach. So, and then preach is the code where we roll a die and see what happens. So what does that mean? Well, P6 is whether you have the particular specialist in your party. So P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P6, I think it goes up to P8. Each of them is a different type of specialist that can be in your expedition, and P6 is the missionary. And $S keeps track of the health of any of them that might be present, and also of you, the explorer, the player character. If it's 0, that means they're not sick, so S stands for sick. So P6, if you have a preacher, and if that preacher is not sick, and because you can only preach in one place once, we have an array to keep track of that. If $IP $I, remembering that $I is how far you are inland, if that equals 1, well, you've already preached here, so you don't get to preach again. And that might happen if you're returning, if you've done your expedition and you're returning back to the back to port. And so we set IPI to 1 so that we never preach there again, and then we include the subroutine, which is rolling a dice and seeing what happens. And the treat check is exactly the same. It's just that this number is different because the doctor is in a different slot to the missionary. And so once we've done the preach check and the treat check, then we go to trade. Although actually, I think what I would probably do is do it the other way around. That it makes more sense, I think, that you trade and then you see what's happened, because these checks can result in people dying. So someone can poison the preacher or the doctor. The doctor can get sick and die, and it seems a bit odd that the preacher would start to preach, the natives would kill the preacher, and then you would say, great, well, let's just trade. It seems more likely that you would trade and then discover that the preacher had been killed. So I would probably put it in this order instead. But that's what I've done so far. In future videos, I will be getting into what happens if they're hostile, which, as I say, it will be that they try to poison you or a battle ensues. And what happens, how does trade work? But for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.